4. Catherine was baffled by everyone's willingness to keep up the pretense that Christine never existed within the walls of the convent. She needed to clear her head, so after her chores were done, she decided to go for a walk around the freezing cold grounds. A gust of wind hit her face as soon as she stepped across the threshold, but considering the insanity that was penetrating the convent, she figured that some icy weather was nothing compared with what was happening inside. She trudged along the gravel path, her nose growing red and her teeth chattering from the cold morning air. She wrapped her shawl tighter against her body as she approached the small graveyard that she'd seen from her bedroom window. Thinking she could bypass the resting place of the dead, she increased her pace but stopped when she noticed two small figures huddled together inside the graveyard. They were too far away for her to recognize them, but her curiosity got the better of her, and, before she knew it, she was opening the gate and heading in their direction. As she got closer to them, she noticed that their grimy faces were stained with tears, and they were gripping one another. She wasn't sure if they were trying to keep warm or finding solace in each other's company. "What are you doing?" Catherine asked as she drew near. "You're going to freeze to death just standing here, you know." Startled by Catherine's sudden appearance, both girls jumped away from each other, struggling to stay upright in the dense mud in which they were standing. "What do you think you're doing, sneaking up on us?" one of the girls hissed at her. "You nearly scared us half to death." Catherine's mouth fell open, surprised by this serious overreaction to her arrival. The girls looked a little older than her, around 16, she guessed. She recognized their faces from dinner the evening before. "You're the new girl, Katherine, aren't you?" the other girl asked. Catherine thought this girl was the more approachable of the two. Her massive curly auburn curls whipped around her face, and she struggled to keep the strands from getting in her eyes. She was wearing a worn gray frock with a neckline that was curling from age, allowing Catherine to see a scattering of bruises across her upper chest. The varying colors of yellow and purple showed that some were more recent than others. "I'm Lauren, and this is Grace," she said, gesturing to the other girl, who was still glaring at Catherine. "What do you want?" Grace barked and folded her arms across her chest. Clearly, this girl had no interest in being civil towards her. Catherine narrowed her eyes at Grace's gruff tone as she scrutinized her. Grace's gaunt face and sunken eyes did very little to help her appearance. With her pale complexion, she resembled a ghost. Her hair looked like it had been roughly shaven off. Some patches were thicker than others, and some were so closely shaven that her scalp was red and raw in parts. Deciding not to anger Grace any further by commenting on her odd appearance, Catherine addressed her previous question with an exaggerated eye roll as if to say, "Isn't it obvious?" "I was just out walking, and I saw you both. I wanted to see what you were doing, standing here in the graveyard." "We're saying goodbye to Eofi," Thorin said. She bent down and placed a handful of thistles on the grave behind her. Catherine stifled a laugh. "You know those are weeds you're putting on the grave. They're not flowers." She moved closer to the small headstone, ignoring Grace's perpetual glare. She read the name that was etched upon it. Eofi Crowley. The earth around it looked freshly dug. Eofi must have only passed recently. Lauren blushed and gazed down at her feet. "We don't have anything else to put on her grave," she murmured, before looking back at Catherine. "The thistles kind of look like flowers. At least, that's what Eofi always used to say." "What happened to her?" Catherine asked. "What do you think happened to her?" Grace cried. "It's the same thing that happens to everyone here after a while. It's her. She just—" "Hush," Lauren said as she placed her hand across Grace's mouth. "Don't say any more." She looked around in panic. "You know she can hear you. She can hear everything." The wind suddenly ceased as Lauren uttered those words. It was as if everything around them stood still, afraid of making even a decibel of noise. "Who are you talking about?" Catherine asked. Her hands began shaking. Whether from the cold or apprehension, she wasn't sure, but she clenched them into fists to try to stop the tremors. Grace pushed Lauren's hand away from her face and rubbed her mouth in disgust before spitting on the ground. "Don't put your hand on my mouth," she shouted. "You know that she needs to know." And she gestured in disdain at Katherine. Lauren looked at Katherine with wide eyes. Her chin started to tremble as she struggled to stop the onslaught of tears that threatened to come. She glanced around again before shaking her head in defeat and beckoning for Grace to continue. Grace nodded her head at her, welcoming the opportunity to continue her explanation. "It's Sister Nora. After a while, everyone meets their demise at her hand. We don't know why, but even if we do everything right, nor draw any attention to ourselves, it doesn't matter. Everyone's fate is sealed. She submits us to horrendous abuse, sometimes for days at a time. It becomes so unbearable that sometimes you just wish it would all end, and you beg for God to make that happen. But it never does. God never answers our pleas. Only the lucky ones, like Eofi here, get to escape the hell we're living in." Grace rubbed her head and winced. Lauren reached out and rubbed her arm in sympathy, but Grace shrugged her off. "Is that what happened to your head?" Katherine asked. Grace folded her arms across her chest and huffed. "Well, I didn't do it to myself now, did I? Like I said, everyone gets the same treatment, so you'd best prepare yourself for what's to come. If you're lucky, you'll only have to endure it for a short time before you end up like Eofi." Grace took Lauren's arm and pulled her away, leaving Katherine alone in the graveyard to absorb what she had just been told. "Is no one safe here?" she wondered.